Hello YouTube and welcome back to the nation of free to play. I'm Mr. Mondstadt and today the new Spiral Abyss just dropped, which means it is time for another Abyss guide video, and boy, what the heck did the devs cook up here. I will talk about the enemy lineup, the best units to play, and give you my F2P tips and tricks to help you in getting 36 stars on your account. Let's go! Alright, let's have a look at the enemies of this floor 12. In the first chamber, the Superheavy Landrover is making a comeback. This one requires lots of pyro to break the shields, so already kinda restrictive. On the other side we have one Hilichurl Rogue and the dog, the Lord of Hidden Depths. So if 12-1 is already that chill on both sides, you know we're in for a ride. In 12-2 we start off a bit more flexible with a Chichen Mage, a Rune Drake and the Primo Geovishap. Nicole is a shielder, so that makes sense. On the other side though, we have a new boss, this local legend Mushroom. Looks cute, but is one of the most restrictive bosses in the game, more on it later. And lastly in 12-3 we have the battle-hardened Mandragora, and the second side a Rune Guard, followed by the Bloom Shill Crab, also a local legend of course. What are the blessings? 75% pyro damage bonus on the first side and 75% increased lunar-bloom damage on the second side. Only lunar-bloom, not normal bloom? No, that's cool, sure. Honestly, this abyss might be so chill that even on my account I won't be able to 9-star with that many teams without switching up and adjusting your party for the individual floors. I would suggest you do the same. Focus on 12-1, get your stars and then reset for 12-2 and 12-3. With that being said, who should you play? The banners for this abyss are Lauma, Nephron, Nicole and Doran, so there you have it. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you in... No, let's face this lineup. First side, you need some form of pyro. The Landrover and the Mandragora both want you to fill up their stall bars with pyro attacks, so Doran, Mavuika, Shanling, Nicole, Arlecchino or even Pyro MC are some good options. Klee or Chevrus should also work. The second chamber is pretty flexible, but a shielder would be useful for the Vishap. If you don't have one, you can also pick up a crystallized shard though to counter its radiant shower attack. The Mandragora will also require AoE or a good grouper so that you can defeat all of its small mushrooms at once. Venti is your best bet, but Kazuha, ideally with a sack sword or Sucrose, can get the job done as well. Other options will be worse, and I assume that you at least have Sucrose, so just use her if you don't have a 5-star grouper. Venti is also super useful against the Landrover as he reapplies pyro through his infused burst. Burning should also work for that boss in case you're struggling with breaking the shield. And since Venti, Doran and Nicole are all super strong on the first side, you could also run Vaka. No, he's actually one of the best carries here, so if you have him, go ahead. For 4 stars other than Shangling, Sucrose and Chevrus, Prune, Fischl, Lanyan and maybe a C6 Aether with C6 Pharosun can help, depending on your investment. For the second half, if you have Lauma and Nephra, you will have a very easy time. If you only have Lauma, she will probably be able to make it through with Bloom/Hyperbloom teams, and if you have Columbina with her, you can play Bina as the DPS, as she will be able to deal lunar-bloom damage. If you don't have any of the three, that's bad news, as you want lunar damage against the dog, lots of Dendro against the mushroom and bloom against the crab. If you have a strong Nilou with Nahida, you might be able to get through, but without it will be tricky. The dog is the first problem, but if you have a lunar DPS, you can kill it pretty easily. However, Flint or Zubai will have problems with the bloom shill mechanics of the other bosses, which is why changing teams is recommended so much. Without nod-krai, the dog is pretty tanky, but Mavuika or Skirk should be fine against it as well. Just bear in mind that you need to kill its summons if you don't have lunar damage. Against the mushroom, it is a problem. This local legend can be found in the Temple of Space. I will go over its mechanics in more detail in a bit, but you need to apply Dendro to decrease its resistance, and Electro and Pyro will reset your progress, so you kinda have to play Bloom or Lunar Bloom. If you can apply enough Dendro to keep the mushroom's resistance low, The actual fight should be rather simple, but since there are basically no good bloom teams in the game other than Nefer, Lauma and maybe Nilou, I really don't like this shill mechanic. And for 12-3 the same problem applies, as the bloom crab will stall in the air and you need to trigger bloom damage to the seeds to bring it back down. Here Hyper Bloom Inversion will work as well. Also, if you are very fast on the first half, you could technically outweight the crab and one-phase it when it eventually drops down, but it will require a very strong team and is probably harder than playing Hyper Bloom in this chamber. With the general advice out of the way, let's have a closer look at every individual chamber. 12-1-1. The Superheavy Landrover is the first boss of this abyss and requires Pyro in order to deal with its high resistance. At the start of the fight, the machine has a base res of 150% against all elements, which means that even with a lot of res shred you will not deal any significant damage. Therefore, brute forcing this boss without a bunch of 5-star cons is basically impossible. Instead, you need to apply a lot of Pyro to fill up the circle. Pyro carries like Mavuika and Arlecchino are one good option, but ideally you pair them with off-field applicators like Doran or Xiangling as well. However, you can also make other elements work in your favor. Animal units like Venti or Kazur can infuse their bursts with Pyro, which will help in filling up the circle, and if you don't have that, Dendro units like Emily or Kenich can trigger the burning reaction. The burning aura will reapply Pyro consistently and break the boss in no time. Once the circle is 50% filled, the Landrover will enter the overheated state. In this state, its resistance will drop down to 50%, which is still quite a bit, but now you will already deal some damage and red shredding characters start helping you way more. Once the circle is completely filled, the boss will get a cryo ward, protecting it from damage and cooling down the circle. Your job does not change though, as you simply need to keep applying more Pyro to break the cryo ward in time. It is a 28 gauge ward, which means you need 56 hits of Anima or Geo, 28 hits of Electro and only 14 hits of Pyro in order to get rid of it. Once you've done so, the boss will be paralyzed for a few seconds and its resistance will drop down further to -20%. In this phase you should be able to deal big damage to it and ideally finish it off before the whole process resets. While the Landrover itself can be tackled with quite a few team cores, if you do not want to change teams for the Mandragora in 12-3, I would recommend bringing an animal unit who can also work as a grouper. While Overload is very effective against the Landrover, it will be rather annoying in 12-3 as the Overload reaction will ungroup the small summons, so bear that in mind when making your teams. However, and I can't stress this enough, you can also get your 3 stars in 12-1 and then reset with a different team for 12-2 and 12-3. Once you've finished a chamber with full stars, you will not lose them the next time around, even if you clear in a slower time. So, if you're struggling against the rover, Overload with Shabrus and Fischl can be pretty helpful. Should you go for that, remember that you can burst on Shabrus and then use her whole skill 3 times in a row. Every shot will apply Pyro onto the enemy, which will fill the circle faster. 12-1-2. The Hilichurl Rogue is simply a stalling boss, so I will not waste any time on it. The actual fight here is against a lot of hidden depths. This enemy is part of the nod-krai shill squad and pretty tough to deal with if you do not have any lunar reactions available. Its stress is normal, so only 10%, but it has a special kind of shield. At the start of the fight, the dog will create a deep dark shield equal to 45% of its max HP and summons 4 Fissure of Hidden Depths. You now have to get rid of the boss's shield in order to decrease its resistance to -60% and deal damage to it. You have 2 options to do so. Option 1. If you have lunar reaction damage in your party, then you should attack the boss itself and ignore the 4 small summons. Lunar damage will break the shield in no time, as it is 3 times as efficient as normal elemental damage. It does not matter whether you use lunar-bloom, lunar charge or lunar crystallize, all 3 will work. So if you have any 5-star from nod-krai, you should be able to break the shield without too much of a hassle, and Colombina alone can convert the normal reactions into their lunar variations, so she should also be enough. However, if you don't have any lunar damage, then you should go with option 2. Ignore the boss and attack the 4 chickens instead. These summons do not have a shield, and every time you defeat one of them, the boss will lose a part of its shield. In order to break the entire shield, you would need to kill all 4 though. Unfortunately, the chickens are not too close to each other, so some form of AoE damage or a grouper is advisable. As long as you can hit all of them with your DPS, you should be able to get rid of them with a strong team. Mawika, Skirk or Varessa should be fine. You have 18 seconds in total, whether you go for option 1 or 2. Should you not be able to break the shield in time, the boss will deal big damage to you and it is most likely a reset. Once again, while lunar-bloom is your general best option for the second half of this abyss, if you don't have Lauma or Nefer, you could also bring a different team for the dog and then change teams for the following chambers. 12-1. The first half of chamber 2 is probably the easiest one of this spiral abyss, as you can play basically anyone against this lineup. 1 Electro Chichen Mage, 1 Rune Drake and lastly the Primo Geovishap. The only boss worth talking about is the Vishap though. This one is pretty much immune at the start of the fight, so don't waste your damage abilities the instant it spawns. Afterwards though, the resistance goes down to the normal 10% and from now on, it's just an HP sponge. Its attacks are quite strong, so you might want to bring some form of defensive utility in order to not die. Ideally, you bring a shielder, also because of the Vishap's shower attack. Against this one, you want to be shielded in order to counter the attack, deal damage to the boss and reduce its rest to -40% for 5 seconds. If you don't have a shielder available, try to pick up a crystallized shard instead. This will also grant you a shield and have the same effect. 12-2. Here, the Bloom shill starts for real with the battle-hardened Geoshroom. This local legend from the Temple of Space looks cute, but is a bit of a menace. It will enter the Scorched state at the start of the fight. In this state, the Shroom will have 130% resistance against every element and even 150% against Dendro. It will get a Fury bar with a limit of 300. You need to fill up this circle as well, similar to the Landrover in 12.1, but instead of Pyro, you need to apply Dendro for this one. Once you've done so, the Shroom will be stunned and all of its resistance decreases by 120%. During the time, the circle will tick down again and the boss will return to the Scorched state once it is empty. However, you can delay that process as long as you keep applying Dendro. So far, so good. The bad news is that you cannot use Pyro attacks or Electro attacks against this boss at all. If you use Pyro, the boss will immediately reset the circle and returns to the Scorched state with high resistance. Basically, you start the fight from scratch. If you use Electro, it is not quite as bad, but Electro will make the boss grow in size, perform a bunch of attacks, and then it returns to the Scorched state as well with a half-filled circle. Therefore, Burgeon or Hyperbloom will not work against this enemy. This means that all there is left is Bloom, as Cryo does not react with Dendro and Mono Dendro is not really a thing either. Nilo is probably your best option when it comes to older characters, but otherwise Lauma, Nefer and Colombina are by far your best bets. If you have Lauma and Bina, you can play the latter as a lunar-bloom DPS. In that case, you should level her normal attacks a little, as her charge attacks will be the core part of her gameplay. Also, since most of Bina's damage comes from Lauma's burst on this team, make sure that you run Colombina on a crit build. That means Night Sky and ideally a crit damage weapon. VI-VII is a good 4-star option. You will probably not need a lot of crit rate with a build like that, as Bina Ascends with crit rate gets 15% from her passive, 10% from Lauma and 30% from the Night Sky artifact set, so you start at 79% crit rate without any substats. If you don't have these units, Nahida, Dendra MC, Xingqiu, Yelan, Farina or even the Viet can work, but the question will be whether they can meet the DPS requirements. Technically, You should be able to use Geo, Anemo and Cryo as well on top of your Bloom core, so if you have a strong DPS option here, that might be an option. Skirk will lose value with Dendro in the party of course, and the buy is also not really ideal, but if you have good enough investment, you could try this strategy as well. Just make sure to fill up the Fury bar before you switch to your damage dealer. 12-3-1. The battle-hardened Mandragora is another local legend and of course another one with a stall mechanic. This boss will get a Fury bar as well at the start of the fight. While this one decays on its own, it will take over 30 seconds and the boss will have high res of 80% during that state and is pretty much immune to Dendro anyway. Now, instead of waiting, you should hit the boss with Pyro and or Electro attacks to accelerate the process. Once the bar is empty, the boss will use Spore Bloom and burrows into the ground, spawning mini versions of itself. You now have 17 seconds to deal with these small summons and kill all of them, because after the time the boss will absorb all remaining minis. If no more than 2 minis are remaining, or if you manage to defeat all of them before the boss can absorb them, the Mandragora will fall, be stunned for 6 seconds and have its res decreased by 70%. So far for its mechanics, but in order to have an easy time against the mushroom, you should bring some form of grouping. There is no way you can defeat all of its mini summons individually, so you would need a Wii and grouping instead. Vaka with Venti is your elite option, but Kazuha will get the job done as well. If you don't have either, Sucrose can work too, but it will be a bit more annoying. For Kazuha and Sucrose, make sure to give them a sacrificial sword / fragments for additional skill uses. Next to grouping, Res Shred can also be super valuable here. The boss's res is not as high as in Stygian Onslaught, so having decent Res Shred will actually make a difference. Next to Vivi, Doran, Tsulonin and Sidlali are your best choices. And last but not least, 12-3-2. The last chamber starts with a Rune Guard, but once again the actual challenge is the second boss, the battle-hardened Rock Crab, aka the Bloom Crab. At the start of the fight, the crab will fly up in the air and generate a ward. To break that ward, you need to deal with these seeds it spawns all over the arena. To do so, you have to deal Bloom, Burgeon, Hyper Bloom or Lunar Bloom damage to the seeds. They will turn then into projectiles and fire at the crab, breaking its ward. If you manage to break it entirely, the crab will come down and will be paralyzed with minus 30% resistance. If not, the crab will detonate all seeds at once, dealing big damage to your characters and come back down with 80% resistance. Your strategy should be to deal some form of bloom damage to the seeds, and even once the crab is back down, those seeds are worth targeting as they can hit the boss pretty hard. Since you need some form of bloom for the Geoshroom in 12-2 anyways, the same rules apply here with the advantage that Pyro and Electro will not screw up your progress here. In theory, you could also outweight the crab. If you don't want to break its ward, you can run to the edge of the arena from where the exploding seeds should not one-shot you. Afterwards, you need to go ham on the boss, and you will also need Res Shred to deal with the 80% base resistance. Skirk with a Scoffier might be able to still deal enough damage in time, depending on how fast you could clear the other bosses of Chamber 3. I would not really recommend this strategy, but it is worth mentioning in case you don't have any good Dendro options on your account. Overall, I can see this abyss being very annoying for a lot of players, especially if you do not have Lauma or Nefer on your account. However, don't feel forced to pull for them just because of this. Try to adjust your teams chamber by chamber, and worst case you miss out on a few primos, but that's still more economic than pulling a 5-star just for one abyss clear. And with that being said, I am done for the day. I hope this video helped you with your abyss clears, and if so, please leave a like and subscribe to my channel. Also, if you have any more questions about who to play, what sets to run, rotations, anything like that, feel free to ask me in the comments down below and I will try to answer as many as possible. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!